African Political School of Thought, Nnamdi Kanu's Pan-African Self-Determination Ideology versus Julius Malema's Pan-African Federalist Ideology. Both Nnamdi Kanu and Julius Malema are influential figures and proponents in their respective ideological contexts, advocating for the rights and autonomy of African peoples. However, their ideologies reflect differing approaches to Pan-Africanism, particularly concerning the right to self-determination and governance. Nnamdi Kanu's Pan-African Self-Determination Ideology. Mazi Nnamdi Kanu is the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB, where his advocacy has been primarily centered around the Biafran independence movement in Nigeria. He draws from historical grievances regarding colonialism, marginalization, and the socio-political struggles faced by the Biafran people in the Nigerian entity. His ideological foundation is drawn from the following sub-thoughts. Self-determination. At the core of Kanu's ideology is the belief that oppressed nations, especially ethnic groups in various African countries like the Igbos in Nigeria, should have the right to self-determination. He sees this as essential to rectify historical injustices and ensure political representation and autonomy. With self-determination, nations, ethnic nationalities balkanized by colonial powers, can gain true freedom and independence, thereby reducing the pervasive ethnic tensions in most African countries. Nationalism. Kanu emphasizes the importance of ethnic identity and nationalism, asserting that the survival and prosperity of every ethnic nationality in Africa, including the Igbo nation in Nigeria, hinge on their independence from Nigeria. This includes creating a sovereign Biafran state that will oversee the overall well-being and development of its own people, bound in cultural mutuality without interference from erstwhile colonial contraption. Decolonization. Kanu's views are entrenched in the idea that Africa must liberate itself from neo-colonial influences, particularly Western involvement in African politics and economies. Kanu proposes that for Africa to be in control of her own destiny, the African people, governments, and institutions must strive to decolonize their mentalities, systems, and modus dictated by colonial or neo-colonial powers, and to achieve this, the idea of continuing with existing contentious colonial borders need to be discarded via referendums. This, according to Kanu, is important towards decolonizing Africa. Cultural revival. Alongside political autonomy, Kanu promotes the cultural revival of the Igbo heritage, positioning cultural identity as pivotal for self-determination. The cultural mutuality of a nation determines how their political stability can be. A multicultural country like Nigeria is replete with ethnic and cultural tensions, and thus hinders growth and development of the respective nations within the country. Grassroots mobilization. Nnamdi Kanu focuses on mobilizing grassroots support for the Biafran cause, utilizing social media platforms and public demonstrations to raise awareness and build a following to his cause. By education and use of enlightenment strategies and tools, such as Radio Biafra, Kanu's ideological views are spread to the reach of the masses who are key to his movement. Julius Malema's Pan-African Federalist Ideology. Julius Malema is the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF, in South Africa, and is known for his radical leftist stances. In brief, leftist stance here emphasizes the advocate for progressive causes, support for disadvantaged groups, government services funded by higher taxes on the wealthy, and social change rather than tradition. Ideologies and movements associated with the leftist political stance include socialism, communism, anarchism, democratic socialism, and progressivism. However, Malema's approach to Pan-Africanism is contextualized within the framework of post-colonial governance and the socio-economic struggles of the African workforce, especially in South Africa. Pan-African federalism. Malema advocates for a united Africa through a federal system of governance that transcends national boundaries. He sees this as essential for addressing socio-economic inequalities created by colonial and neo-colonial powers and fostering political unity among African states. Malema's approach does not consider the abolishment of existing colonial borders in Africa, instead clamor for a united African continent. Collective economic empowerment. A significant aspect of Malema's ideology is the focus on economic freedom, arguing for the nationalization of land and resources to benefit the masses, particularly the disenfranchised Black population in South Africa. Solidarity among African nations. Malema emphasizes the need for solidarity among African nations to challenge imperialism and neo-colonialism collectively, rather than pursuing individual state independence. Political reformation. Rather than pursuing self-determination or true independence, Malema's vision is reformative within existing African nation-states to achieve greater representation and equity in governance for all Africans. Malema emphasizes that a federalist framework for African countries, despite the existing continental organizations like AU, will push Africa to greater representation in the international community. Youth empowerment. Malema places a particular emphasis on the role of the youth in shaping the future of Africa, leveraging their potential for activism through educational reforms and active political participation. Malema advocates the need for youths to engage in politics and economic development in their countries. Comparative analysis. Nnamdi Kanu's focus on identity versus Malema's call for African unity. Kanu's ideology is heavily rooted in ethnic nationalism and the assertion of identity for the Igbo people, while Malema emphasizes Pan-African unity, viewing national identities as a tool for broader collective empowerment. Strategy for change. Kanu seeks independence and self-governance as a means of addressing the historical injustices faced by the Igbo and other ethnic nationalities balkanized by colonial powers, advocating a clear separation from Nigeria, colonial borders. In contrast, Malema's strategy is more about reforming existing structures for greater control and equity within African nations. Economic perspectives. Malema's focus on economic justice and collective ownership highlights a more socio-economic angle of Pan-Africanism, striving to combat inequality as a central theme. Kanu, however, prioritizes political independence as a pathway to self-determination and societal revival, including eradicating economic injustices. Approach to governance. Malema envisions a federal, united Africa that challenges external exploitation and operates under a collective governance system. Kanu operates from a grassroots level, emphasizing local governance and self-sufficiency for the Igbo nation and for every ethnic nationality in Africa. While both Nnamdi Kanu and Julius Malema represent vital strands of Pan-African thought, their ideologies differ fundamentally in their approaches to self-determination and governance. Kanu's emphasis on ethnic nationalism and independence from colonial borders contrasts with Malema's vision of Pan-African federalism focused on structural reform and collective empowerment. Their divergent paths reflect the complexities and diversity of thoughts within the Pan-African movement, responding to unique historical, cultural, and socio-political experiences and grievances. It is important to understand that Kanu is seeking for self-determination of the Igbos in Nigeria, while Malema is advocating for economic justice and political representation of marginalized blacks in South Africa. While both schools of thought are fundamentally aimed at the liberation of Africans, it is therefore imperative that our people are educated to clearly understand the ideological differences that distinguishes the both Pan-African leaders, Nnamdi Kanu and Julius Malema. Family Writers Press International.